The man tied to the chair had stopped screaming an hour ago, leaving only the sterile hum of a single fluorescent light and the slow, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of blood onto cold concrete. In this cathedral of silence and control, the buzz of a burner phone was a desecration. Ruben didn't flinch. He let it vibrate twice on the steel table next to his tools, a ghost signal in a world without ghosts. His men, Davis and Thoney, froze, their eyes fixed on him. This line was for assassins and traitors, not conversation. He finally answered, his voice a low, gravelly hum. What? It wasn't a report, it wasn't a threat. It was the sound of a small universe collapsing, a child's voice, thin and brittle with pure terror. "Please, Mommy won't wake up." Ruben's world operated on three principles: leverage, loyalty, bloodshed. A sobbing child fit into none of them. It was a mistake or a trap, a rival's pathetic new tactic. He was about to disconnect when the boy whispered a sentence that bypassed every wall of ice and steel Ruben had ever built. There's no one else to call." For the first time in a decade, the unchallengeable sovereign of the city's underworld felt a sensation he couldn't name. It wasn't pity, it was something darker. The chilling awareness that a piece of his territory, something he never even knew he'd lost, was out there, unprotected, and crying in the dark. How had a child gotten access to the most secure, untraceable line in his entire empire? And who was the woman who had fallen? He didn't know it yet, but he was racing toward a ghost from 7 years ago, and the two living secrets who were about to become either his greatest vulnerability or his most dangerous reason to stay alive. To understand what was happening on the other end of that phone, we need to go back, just a few hours, to a cramped apartment that smelled of bleach and exhaustion, and to a 6-year-old boy who was about to grow up in a single night. Before we dive in, if you're into story, smash that like button, hit subscribe so you never miss a drop, and share this with someone who needs to see it. All right, let's get into it. The silence was worse than the shouting. When Mommy and the man from downstairs argued, the world was just loud. When Mommy was silent like this, the world stopped. Leo watched her from his spot on the worn rug, tracing the faded patterns with his finger, while Lena drew beside him, her crayon moving in small, focused circles. Mommy's smile, the one she gave them when she came home smelling of 3 different kinds of soap, was a brittle thing tonight. It didn't reach her eyes anymore. Her eyes had shadows under them, deep and purple like bruises. Lena said they were smudges from being so tired. Leo thought they looked like the night was trying to crawl inside her. Tonight, the ghost of their mother was barely there at all. She'd swayed on her feet while pouring a glass of water, her hand trembling. "Just need a minute, my loves," she murmured. Her voice was thin as cobwebs. The minute never came. The sound wasn't a crash. It was a dense, heavy thud, like a sack of laundry dropped from a height. The glass didn't shatter. It popped, a single sharp sound, and then there was just the quiet skittering of ice cubes across peeling linoleum. Paula lay on her back, one arm flung out, eyes closed. Not sleeping still, wrong still. Lena broke first. A tiny animal whimper escaped her lips, then a full-throated wail. "Mommy!" She scrambled across the floor, shaking their mother's shoulder with both hands. "Mommy, wake up, please!" Her small palms patted Paula's face. her sobs turning into frantic, hiccuping gasps. Leah was frozen. Panic was a cold hand squeezing his throat, but something pushed through it, a memory. Mommy kneeling in front of him one night, her face pale in the dim light. "If I ever fall asleep, Leo, if I'm sleeping very deep and you can't wake me, there's a box under the loose board in my room." He ran. His socked feet slipped on the floorboards. He clawed at the edge of her mattress, jamming his fingers into the gap between wood and wall. The board creaked, resisted, then gave way. Inside the dark hollow was a small metal box. Inside the box, a cheap black phone, not the one she used every day, the secret one. His thumb fumbled with the buttons. The groan glowed to life, showing one long number already typed, waiting. He didn't know the number. He didn't know who it belonged to. He only knew Mommy had put it there for a reason. He pressed the green button. 2 rings, then a voice, cold and sharp as breaking glass. "What?" Leo's breath hitched. He could hear Lena crying from the other room, a desperate, fading sound. The voice spoke again, impatient, wrapped in a threat that coiled around his small heart. "This is a terminal line. You have 5 seconds before you stop existing." Tears streamed down Leo's face. He opened his mouth, and what came out was barely a whisper. "Please, Mommy won't wake up." The voice didn't answer. Leo heard nothing but his own pulse and Lena sobbing. He added the only truth he left had. There's no one else to call." The child's whisper hit Ruben like a bullet to the sternum. Bait. It had to be bait. A child's voice was the oldest exploit in the book, manufactured vulnerability designed to trip an emotional wire. His jaw tightened. This was a trap, obvious, sloppy, and for that reason exquisitely dangerous. But his fingers were already flying across the car's encrypted console, running a trace through dummy servers and rerouted signals. The GPS marker settled on a condemned tenement block in the city's forgotten gut, the perfect ambush point. Multiple firing angles, poor visibility, exactly where an enemy would want him to go. He went anyway. The matte black car became a projectile, carving through rivers of neon and rain. He killed the engine 2 blocks out and moved on foot through alleyways, a shadow threading through deeper shadows. Every meter was a potential kill zone. He measured his life in milliseconds and distance, and right now the distance was shrinking fast. He smelled it before he saw it. Ozone, antiseptic, the metallic ghost of adrenaline. He rounded the final corner, and the scene slammed into him. Red and blue lights slashed across grimy brickwork, paramedics, a gurney, police tape already sectioning off the building's entrance. His eyes swept the scene in a tactical scan. Officers, background noise, rooftops clear, windows dark. No ambush, no triggerman, just a genuine emergency in the poorest corner of a city he owned. And then he saw them. 2 children huddled under a silver thermal blanket near the ambulance, a boy and a girl, twins. The boy's head was turned toward the flashing lights, his small face illuminated in fractured bursts of red and white. Every tactical process in Ruben's mind stalled because he was looking at a photograph of himself from a life he had never lived. The defiant obsidian stare, the hard set of the jaw, already a promise of the man it would become. Those were his eyes, his own eyes, staring back at him from a 6-year-old face. The girl was crying silently into the boy's shoulder. She had the same dark hair, the same delicate bone structure that belonged to... His gaze snapped to the gurney being loaded into the ambulance. Strands of dark hair clung to a cheekbone he had once traced with his thumb in another lifetime. Paula. The world didn't stop, it inverted. This wasn't a trap an enemy had set. He was the trap, a snare he'd laid 7 years ago, and the teeth were only now closing around his throat. But this moment, shattering as it was, had set something else in motion, because Ruben wasn't the only one watching. 2 blocks north, parked in a sedan with tinted windows, a man named Victor Salas had been following Ruben all night. Victor was Ruben's second-in-command, his most trusted lieutenant, and he had just watched the most feared man in the city freeze at the sight of 2 children. In their world, a man with something to lose was a man who could be broken. Victor picked up his phone.
The hospital was a different kind of battlefield, one Ruben was hopelessly unequipped for. The air, thick with antiseptic and quiet desperation, clung to his lungs like poison. He stood anchored to the polished linoleum, a weapon in a place of healing, his very presence a contradiction. A doctor approached, his face a mask of exhausted professionalism. "Family for Paula Reyes?" Ruben gave a curt nod, a lie that felt more true than anything he'd said in 7 years. "She's stable, but her heart is under immense strain. Stress-induced cardiomyopathy, broken heart syndrome in layman's terms. It's chronic, exacerbated by years of sustained physical and emotional stress. Malnutrition hasn't helped. Her body has been fighting a war for a very long time." A war. Ruben had fought wars in scorched alleyways and frozen harbors. He never knew she'd been fighting one too, alone, while raising his children. He moved past the doctor without permission, gliding through corridors he had no right to occupy. He entered her room like it was a hostile breach point, silent, controlled, lethal. And there she was, a ghost tangled in white sheets and clear tubing. The monitor beeped its metronomic countdown. He watched the shallow rise and fall of her chest, tracing the line of a jaw that had lost its softness, sharpened by years of hardship into a blade. Her eyes didn't flutter open. They snapped wide, clear, dark, and immediate. There was no slow dawning of recognition. There was only the primal terror of prey spotting the predator it has spent years fleeing. The terror held for one shattering second. Then something harder consumed it, a cold black fury that burned away the fear. Her lips barely moved, the whisper cut through the beeping like a blade. "You can't have them." It wasn't a plea, it was a vow, forged in 7 years of running, of working 3 jobs, of pouring herself empty so her children could be full. Ruben stood frozen, the words hitting him with the force of a battering ram. He looked at the defiant fire in her eyes, at the frail body that had become a fortress against the world, against him. The doctor gave her condition a clinical name, but Ruben, staring at the woman he had broken, understood its true origin. He wasn't a ghost from her past. He was the disease. And somewhere across the city, Victor Salas was already making calls, pulling threads, learning everything he could about the woman in the hospital bed and the 2 small weapons she had given birth to.
To understand Paula's eyes, you need to see what she saw 7 years ago, on a rain-slicked night that would shatter her life in half. She had been sitting in Ruben's car, one hand resting on the small, secret curve of her belly, where the twins were still a symphony only she could hear. He was collecting a debt, a simple business matter. 5 minutes, he said. but the minutes stretched, and a thread of unease pulled her from the car toward the narrow alley behind the restaurant. She heard them before she saw them, a man's voice, desperate and pleading. Ruben's voice, placid, almost kind. He was the man who brought her tea every morning, the man who hummed while he cooked, the man whose hands she had imagined holding their children. "I need more time, Ruben, please." Ruben shook his head, a gesture of mild disappointment, like a teacher correcting a small mistake. Then he moved, not fast, not angry, efficient. He took the man's outstretched hand, the one raised in surrender, and twisted. The sound was a wet, compact crack, like a thick branch snapping underfoot. The man crumpled. Ruben was already stepping away, wiping his palms on a handkerchief as if he'd cleaned up a minor spill. He looked up and saw her. His eyes, the same eyes that had looked at her with adoration an hour before, were flat, empty, no apology, no shock, just the cold assessment of a new problem to be managed. In that gaze, she saw the truth. The man she loved was a careful costume, and the thing wearing it was patient, ruthless, and utterly alien. Then a flutter. Deep inside her, a tiny, frantic spasm, a spark of life recoiling from the proximity of death. It was the first time she had felt the move, not a gentle kick of greeting, but a jolt of raw terror. It was her children, from the silent darkness of the womb, screaming a single primal command, "Run!" But she didn't run, not yet, because Ruben didn't let her. What followed was a gilded nightmare. He moved her to an estate deep in a forest of silent pines, a fortress of glass and stone, with no fences, no visible walls, just an unnerving perimeter of perfect nature that felt more impassable than barbed wire. Doctors on retainer, a library of unread books, a kitchen that gleamed like a showroom, and a nursery more beautiful than anything she'd ever dreamed. Above the hand-carved cribs, turning slowly in still air, hung a mobile, little hand-painted wooden foxes and starlings, identical to one she'd saved on a private wish list she had never shared with a living soul. He had been watching her, studying her, mining her thoughts long before she ever knew what he was. "There isn't a thought in that beautiful head I don't already know," he murmured, his arms wrapped around her from behind as they both watched the mobile spin. "So you can stop fighting me now. We're finally home." She stopped fighting. She stopped eating. She stopped speaking. She became so still, so ghost-like, that even his surveillance couldn't track the plan forming in the silence of her mind. On a night when snow muffled every sound, she walked out through a service entrance that his cameras had covered, but his men had not. She carried 2 newborns against her chest and nothing else. She vanished into the kind of poverty that even Ruben's network couldn't easily scan. She became Paula Reyes, no history, no digital footprint, no past, just a woman with 2 babies and a prepaid phone hidden under a floorboard. A phone with 1 number saved, not because she ever planned to call him, but because she knew that if she was ever truly dying, her children would need the only monster powerful enough to keep them alive. She just never imagined a 6-year-old would be the one to press the button. But here's the thing about monsters. When you call one, you don't just summon protection, you summon the war that follows it. And the war was already closer than anyone knew. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this so far, go ahead and like the video right now. Share it with a friend who'd love this. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Okay, back to it.
Back in the present,
Ruben sat in his car outside the hospital for 3 hours after Paula's words. Engine off, city humming around him, indifferent. You can't have them. He replayed it on a loop, each repetition stripping another layer from the armor he'd spent a decade welding to his soul. She was right. He couldn't be their father. He didn't know what that word meant. But he could be something else, something he did understand. A perimeter. He posted men on Paula's block, ghosts in parked cars, shadows on rooftops, not captors, sentries. He paid her medical bills through a chain of anonymous trusts so layered a forensic accountant would drown in the paperwork. He watched from a distance, a gargoyle perched over a life he couldn't enter. But distance was a luxury his world wouldn't grant him. Victor Salas had served Ruben for 12 years. He knew the rules better than anyone. No attachments, no leverage, no exposed flanks. A leader with a family was a leader with a target painted on everyone he loved. Victor wasn't cruel by nature. He was pragmatic, and pragmatism in their world was often indistinguishable from cruelty. The information moved through the network like a virus. Ruben has children. Ruben has a woman. The sovereign of the underworld, the man who ruled through the myth of his invulnerability, had a seam, and Victor, who had ambitions he'd kept buried for a decade, began to pull at it. It started small, a missed shipment drawing police attention to Paula's neighborhood, a bureaucratic flag on her work permits, pressure applied to her landlord. The message was never spoken aloud, but Ruben could read it in the pattern, like a sailor reads weather. Someone was squeezing his family, and there was only one person close enough to know where to squeeze. Ruben didn't confront Victor, not yet. Instead, he did something far more dangerous. He knocked on Paula's door. She answered with a kitchen knife held low against her thigh. Her eyes were volcanic. Behind her, Leo peered around the doorframe with a look so fierce and suspicious it was almost comical on a 6-year-old face. Lena stood further back, half hidden, watching with wide, cautious eyes. You need to leave this apartment. Tonight. Someone knows you're here. Someone from my world. So your world followed you here, Paula said. Her voice was flat, like it always does. Yes, he didn't dress it up. He didn't apologize. I need 72 hours to end it. And then what? Another cage? No, he met her eyes. A door you can lock from the inside, with me on the outside. Paula stared at him. The knife didn't move, but after a long moment, she stepped aside. Ruben moved them to a safe house that existed on no registry, no map, no database. A clean apartment above a bakery in a part of the city even his own men didn't know he owned. The scent of bread rose through the floorboards at 4 every morning, warm and impossibly ordinary. For 2 days, Ruben was a stranger living at the edge of their world. He slept on a chair by the front door, one hand resting on the deadbolt. He cooked, badly, burning toast and overcooking eggs, while Leo watched from across the counter with the critical eye of a health inspector. Lena, despite everything, laughed. It was a small, surprised sound, as if her own body had betrayed her. Leo shot her a look of pure outrage, which only made her laugh harder. Ruben didn't try to be their father. He didn't kneel down and explain himself. He simply existed in their space, clumsy, enormous, and entirely out of place, and let them decide what he was. On the second night, Leo spoke to him, not with warmth, not with acceptance, just a question, fired like a stone from a slingshot. Are you the reason Mom is sick?" The apartment was quiet. Lena had fallen asleep on the couch, her sketchbook open on her chest. Paula was resting in the bedroom, the door cracked just enough to hear everything. Ruben looked at the boy, at his own eyes burning back at him, and gave him the only thing he had never given anyone, the truth. Yes. Leo absorbed this. His jaw tightened. That jaw, Ruben's jaw. The resemblance was a knife. Then why are you here? Because the people hurting her now aren't me, and those ones I can stop. Then stop them, Leo paused, and go. Through the crack in the bedroom door, Paula closed her eyes. A tear slid down her cheek and disappeared into the pillow. She never got to decide if it was grief or gratitude, because at 2:14 in the morning, the front door of the safe house exploded inward. It happened in the space between heartbeats. Two men, armed, professional. They'd found the bakery through the one thread Victor still had left to pull, a delivery driver who owed the wrong people money. They came through the door expecting a sleeping family. They found Ruben instead. He was already moving before the hinges finished screaming. The first man cleared the threshold and met Ruben's forearm across his windpipe, a short, savage strike that dropped him like a marionette with its strings cut. The second raised his weapon. Ruben seized the barrel with one hand and the man's jaw with the other and twisted both in opposite directions. Something cracked. The gun clattered away. The man folded sideways into the wall, painting a smear of red across the plaster, and went still. It was over in 4 seconds. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Ruben stood in the ruined doorway, his chest barely rising. His knuckles were split. A fine mist of blood decorated the collar of his white shirt like a signature. He looked up and saw Leo standing in the hallway, barefoot, his eyes wide and blank with a terror too big for his small body to hold. Behind him, Lena was screaming into Paula's chest, a thin, keening wail that didn't sound like a child at all. Paula stared at Ruben over Lena's head. She looked at the unconscious bodies. She looked at the blood on his hands. Her expression wasn't shock. It was confirmation, the final, exhausted confirmation of a truth she'd been running from for 7 years. "I know how to kill for you," Ruben said, and his voice cracked for the first time. The words scraped out of him like gravel. "I see a threat, and I know how to make it stop. It's the only thing I was ever taught." His eyes were drowning. "But I don't know how to live for you." Paula was still for a long time. The wrecked door breathed cold air into the apartment. Somewhere below, the baker was calling the police. When Paula finally spoke, her voice was quiet, hollow, and utterly devastating. "Then what good are you?" The question hung in the air. Ruben had no answer, not yet. But something behind his eyes shifted. Not softness, not redemption, something colder and more deliberate, a decision. He looked at the blood on his hands. Then he looked at his son's face, white with terror in the hallway light. And Ruben decided to find a different weapon.
On the third night, Ruben went to work, but not the work of blood and broken bones. He had spent a lifetime learning that violence was a blunt instrument, effective, immediate, and ultimately temporary. The dead were replaced, the broken healed, fear faded, but ruin was permanent. He reached into the dark circuitry of his empire, pulling threads he hadn't touched in years.
He called in debts from men who thought he'd forgotten. He leveraged favors from ghosts who wished he had. He didn't hunt Victor, he mapped him. He peeled back the layers of Victor's carefully constructed loyalty and found the rot underneath. Skimmed accounts, diverted shipments, a constellation of small betrayals that individually were forgivable, but together formed the portrait of a man who had been building his own kingdom inside Ruben's walls for years. The confrontation took place in a parking garage at dawn. No guns, no enforcers, just two men and the hum of fluorescent lights. Victor saw him and smiled, the smile of a man who believed he still had cards to play. "You've gotten soft, Ruben. A woman? Children? You taught me yourself. Those are pressure points, not—" Ruben held up a phone. On the screen was a single spreadsheet, dates, amounts, account numbers. Victor's smile died. "Every captain in the network received this file 14 minutes ago," Ruben said. His voice was flat, clinical. "Not from me, from your own bookkeeper. He was remarkably cooperative once I explained that loyalty only flows in one direction." Victor's face went the color of old concrete. In their world, the evidence didn't require a verdict. Numbers were a death sentence pronounced by arithmetic. "You can run. You might even make it somewhere I can't reach, but I wouldn't bet on it, and I wouldn't bet slowly." Victor's phone buzzed, then buzzed again, then went silent, the kind of silence that meant the people on the other end had stopped trying. He looked at Ruben one last time, searching for the crack, the weakness, the man who'd frozen at the sight of two children. He didn't find it. Whatever he saw in Ruben's eyes made him turn around and walk away without another word. By noon, Victor's apartment was empty. His accounts were frozen. His name was ash. Ruben stood in the parking garage alone. He looked at his hands. They were clean. This was the answer. This was what good he was. Not the fist, not the gun, the wall. The invisible architecture of protection that didn't require blood on his knuckles, only vigilance, only the willingness to be the darkest thing in the room so that the people he loved never had to see the dark at all. But the wall still needed a door. He drove Paula to see it on a Saturday morning. The children stayed behind with a nurse he truly trusted, not the way he'd trusted Victor. The car was quiet, the city scrolling past the windows like a film neither of them was watching. He stopped in front of a modest house on a street where all the trees were the same age, their leaves forming an unbroken canopy overhead. It had a small yard, a porch swing, and a mailbox with a red flag. It was aggressively, painfully normal. "It's yours," Ruben said, his voice level. "Everything is arranged, a trust in the children's names, untouchable until they're 21. You'll never work 3 jobs again. You'll never skip meals so they can eat." Paula stared at the house, at the warm glow of the porch light he must have turned on earlier. She understood what it was, but she needed to know what it wasn't. "And you?" He looked at her, and his eyes held no warmth, only a terrible clarity. "I can't be the man who lives here. I wasn't built for it. But I can be the wall around this entire street. I can be the reason no one ever finds this address." He paused. "I'll be out there, always." He placed the keys in her palm. The metal was cold against her skin. "So you're a ghost now," she whispered. Something in his posture fractured. He had built her a sanctuary from the storm, and in doing so had exiled himself to the heart of it. "Worse," he said, and the admission was the quietest sound she had ever heard. "I'm the thing the ghosts are afraid of." Paula closed her hand around the keys, the sharp edges biting into her flesh. She looked at the house. Then she looked at the broken man beside her. A monster offering her a life he could never share, asking for nothing in return except the knowledge that his children would sleep safely. She didn't forgive him. Forgiveness was a bridge she couldn't build, not yet, maybe not ever. But she opened the car door and stepped onto the sidewalk. She stood in the golden light of a porch that belonged to her, breathing air that smelled of cut grass and someone else's barbecue and the ordinary miracle of a life without fear. She didn't look back at the car, but she didn't tell him to leave either. That night, after the boxes were carried in by men who didn't make eye contact, after Lena had chosen the room with the window and declared the backyard acceptable, after Paula had stood alone in the kitchen just touching the clean countertops with her fingertips, Leo went to his room and closed the door. He sat on the bare mattress and pulled the metal box from his backpack, the one from under the floorboard. The cheap black phone was still inside, its screen dark, its single saved number waiting like a held breath. He turned it over in his small hands. He thought about the man with his face who slept in chairs and burned toast and broke people like they were made of paper. He thought about his mother's shadows, his sister's laugh, the way the porch light turned the front yard into something that looked like a painting of someone else's happy life. He didn't understand everything. He was 6, but he understood this. The phone was a rope. On one end was a monster. On the other end was the only thing in the world strong enough to keep other monsters away. He put the phone back in the box. He slid the box under his new bed, in the space between the frame and the floor, close enough to reach in the dark. Then Leo pulled the covers to his chin, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, fell asleep without listening for the sound of his mother falling. 3 blocks away, parked beneath a streetlight that had burned out months ago, a matte black car sat in perfect darkness. Inside, Ruben watched the last light in the house go out. He didn't move. He didn't leave. He sat like a gargoyle on a cathedral, stone still and watchful, guarding a kingdom he would never be allowed to enter. The night settled around him. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked, a screen door slapped shut. A child who was not his laughed in someone else's yard. Ruben closed his eyes and kept watch. That's a wrap. If this hit different, drop a like. It genuinely helps. Share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe because there's a lot more coming you won't want to miss. See you in the next one.